former National leaders have responded to revelations from this year's release of thousands of cabinet documents from 1982 and 1983.
For more, Julia Doyle joins us now from Canberra. Julie, good morning. These papers show the end of the Fraser government and the start of the Hawke administration. The former Prime Minister, Mr Hawke, has been reflecting on that. What has he had to say?
Well, Michael, when he's been asked on ABC's AM program this morning on the radio to talk about his reflections of that time, one of the main things he focuses in on is that National Economic Summit that was held in April 1983. Now, that was held less than a month after the Hawke government came into power. And Bob Hawke really puts down all the economic successes of 1983, he says, stem from that one event back earlier in the year. Now, he talks about that event in the way that it brought people together. It brought the state and federal and local governments, as well as businesses and unions and church groups all together. And Mr Hawke says it informed them about the economic situation in a way that they hadn't been informed before. And at the end, they got a communique where all these groups, except for Joh Bjelke-Petersen, agreed with what needed to be done and accepted what needed to be done. And they're talking there about centralising wage fixing and looking at how to tackle inflation and unemployment. So as I mentioned, that's the one thing that Bob Hawke really highlights and talks about from that time in 1983, and that everything from then on stems from that National Economic Summit.
Although his former Treasurer Paul Keating begs to differ somewhat on those recollections of those economic successes of the time.
Yes, well, not surprisingly, Paul Keating and Bob Hawke don't agree on this one, as they don't agree on a lot of things. But in The Australian today, Paul Keating is quoted about his reflections of the National Economic Summit. Now, he says that that summit was held basically to try to get a wages restraint in place because of the wages explosion that had taken place while Bob Hawke was the president of the ACTU. So he talks about two particular periods where there was wages explosion. And he says there that those two events nearly destroyed the Australian economy, and that economic summit was all about a way of getting a sensible exit from those policies. So having a bit of a go there at Bob Hawke this morning when it comes to his reflections of that National Economic Summit. And the other thing that the two men don't agree on as well is the decision to float the Australian dollar that came at the end of 1983. Now, Bob Hawke says that Paul Keating came to that idea belatedly, but Paul Keating has said in that article in The Australian this morning that he sees that that's a diminished reflection, a diminished memory from Bob Hawke, and it's got nothing to do with a diminished role that he had in that important economic decision.
The feud that'll never end. Let's look briefly at contemporary politics, Julie, and that Christmas-New Year's truce is more or less holding up between Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott.
Oh, yes, it is. We haven't seen a lot from them at the moment. We saw Julia Gillard back out yesterday talking about an election commitment that she made as far as extra funding for teenagers who stay at school. So we saw her out and about on the end of the year, getting back into it, visiting a family and talking to the media. But we haven't seen much from Tony Abbott yet. We saw his pre-recorded New Year's message released yesterday, but we're expecting we'll see that start to fire up again. I don't think this truce will last too much longer, Michael.
I'm pretty sure that that won't be the case. And a reminder, Paul Keating is on AM Radio Current Affairs this morning. Bob Hawke, the former Prime Minister, is on AM. Julie Doyle in Canberra, thank you.
Thank you.